This is the sworn statement, testimony. This is public comment. It's up to you guys. If you just want to be sworn in on record, it says one of you just want to make a public comment. You can talk about it, yeah. But that one's just sworn in or testimony. It'll be typed up in court record. You gotta put your address.
Before we all get started, if you would please take the time now to check your cell phones, either have them silenced or off. Thank you.
Well, it won't be going off.
The last word.
Okay, it responds with Genesis 1:1, Revelations 21:1, Revelations 22:12 and 13. That's his answer to the question.
Pretty funny.
Did your lawyer ever tell you that? Never say anything over that? Works for hell. Talk during this too.
It's for the two different meetings. There's two meetings? One's a hearing.
Folks, it's time to call the meeting to order. We're about a minute late right now. Appreciate your interest and concern as we have the meeting tonight. Let's have a roll call of the members here.
Kurt Rock.
Here.
Ed Moore.
Here.
Josh Blackhawk.
Here.
Alan Moore.
Yes, here. If you would, let's stand for pledge of allegiance to the flag, please. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'm sure you're all aware of why we're here, so I don't really have to say anything there. Before we get started, we as a committee need to approve the minutes of our former meeting. Is there any comments or questions in regards to them? If so, I would entertain a motion to accept it.
Make a motion to accept the minutes from last meeting. No second.
Okay, is there anything to discuss on it? Yeah. Kurt. Are you going to be able to hear all right?
Yes, I'm hearing. Thank you.
Any discussion at all? We'll have roll call.
All in favor?
Aye. Opposed, same sign. Okay, we're here, as we talked about, to adopt resolutions related to public comment. We have a resolution for public comment. Would anyone like to make a motion to adopt? The county board has provided us with their consideration.
What is it?
If you speak in this meeting, can you please stand up and say who you are, and then I can record who you are and what you're saying.
My name is Ann Erke, and I'm wondering if you could read that to us, what you're going to vote on, please?
That's what we're here to discuss, is what the county board is proposing, the zoning part of the county board is proposing for the regs.
No, I meant related to the public comment. You were going to adopt a resolution related to public comment.
I guess I'm not following you, what you're talking about.
It's not to take effect tonight, it will take effect after this.
Yeah.
It's not for tonight's meeting.
That's not on tonight's meeting.
I think she wants to know what's in it. Is there a time limit per person for public comment overall? What is it?
There is
I'm
not.
sorry, I need your name, sir.
John Kraft, K-R-A-F-T.
There is not a comment time period. We are asking, looking around the room, a tremendous amount of cooperation from you people, unless you're late night people. And but otherwise, I don't really have any particular points.
The resolution is proposed for a 3-minute time limit in future meetings if it's deemed necessary.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what our question is.
Yes, that's what it clarifies.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay.
There's a total period of 30 minutes proposed.
I need to know your name, sir. If you're going to
This
speak.
resolution is that there be a 30-minute time limit on further meetings, but it is not in effect tonight. It's whether this board wants to adopt that for further meeting, for future meetings. It does not have any effect on tonight's meeting. 3 minutes per person. 3 minutes.
Yeah, total.
Mr. Ryan,
One more, 30 minutes. Get more teachers.
thank you.
Okay, before we get into the provisions itself, we will open it.
Do you have a motion to adopt that resolution?
Okay, I need a motion to adopt that resolution.
I'll make that motion.
Ed, make first or second?
Second.
We have a second. Roger, second. Any further discussion? If none, roll call.
Kurt Rock?
Here.
No. Vote.
Oh, yes.
Ed Moore?
Yes.
Roger Whitehall?
Yes.
Ron Moore?
Yes. Okay. We would like to provide you people, as you know, with a period to express, we would like to open the public hearing to anyone wishing to provide testimony on the matter that we're discussing. And in that testimony, for her benefit, for our benefit, for everyone concerned, you need to state your name, your address, and your connection with the wind farms that we're discussing this evening. Does everyone understand that? All right. Okay. Is there anything else we need to start out with? Have the list. When you come up to speak, once again, we want you to state your name, address, and purpose of what involvement you have. Okay. Okay. We will at 7:09 p.m. call the hearing to order as we start for the evening. I guess I have the list here. I suppose there's no reason that as the list is written, the first one on the list would be Jerry Wright.
Please go up to the chair where the microphone is next to the clerk.
Step up there.
Yes, please.
Raise your right hand, Mr. Moore.
Before you begin, I'll get this before we get the night over with, I think. You need to be sworn in. You affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Name, Jerry Wright, address 614 East 13th, Gibson City. The reason I'm concerned, we're looking at buying land in the country. We have a landowner that's willing to sell to us, but it's also under contract for the windmills, and the setbacks definitely concern me. I think I've seen anywhere from 1,000 on some proposals here and there, of what we have, up to 3,250 is what some people are asking, and I think from what I've found, that is where we should be, and it should be from the property line. Main reason from the property line, I cannot come and build a house or a building on anyone else's property without their permission or compensation. Why should the windmills be allowed to use my property for their setback without my permission and without compensation? That's my big concern, is getting that setback back, health, safety, sounds, those things. That's really my main concerns, and that's about all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Next one.
With the cords being strewn about over here, if you would walk around this way so we don't have people tripping on the cords, thank you.
Mary Ann Harris. And you solemnly swear to tell the truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you, ma'am.
All right, I'm Mary Ann Harris. I live 780 East, 500 North Road, east of Gibson City. I've got a 5-acre plot there. It's got a house on it, tool shed, and my business. And my business, I've had this for 40 years. It is a dog grooming, dog boarding business. It's a 30 by 80 building. I have 9 employees, plus myself. I wondered, my house sits relatively in the center of my property, and I wondered how close my doghouse is my business. So when I refer to doghouse, it means my dog boarding, dog grooming business. I wondered how close my doghouse, which sits east of my house, how close that was to my property line. So I got a wheel measurement. Now, I'm not a professional at this, so this might be off a little bit. But I measured it, and it measures from my house to my doghouse, 241 feet. So then I went from my doghouse to the edge of the property, which would be on the east side of my doghouse. And that measured 68. So you add those two things together, and if they measure from my house and put a windmill on the east side of me, I could have a windmill 700 feet from my house. I don't think that's very safe, considering accidents do happen. I've been hearing about ice throws, noise. And I'll tell you something about dogs. People come when they bring their dogs into my building, and we go back to the boarding area, which everybody does. I expect them to go back. I want to see where everything is, what it looks like, so on and so forth. And the dogs bark. Anybody that has dogs understand this, that dog that's in their pen in the back is going to announce their space. So everybody barks. And then the people will say, you mean, do they bark like that all the time? And I said, no. If they did, they would be sick. They would be sick from stress. Stress brings on a lot of things with dogs, just like with us. They get sick. I'm very, very concerned about the noise. I have no idea what these things are going to sound like. I don't know if anybody does at this point. But it concerns me, because if the dogs don't sleep, they're sick. They get sick. The people that entrust their animals, which is their family members, to me, are not really going to be very happy with me. And my business that I care so much about, that I've had for almost 40 years, is gone. I have 9 employees, as I told you. Those 9 employees have jobs with me. If there are no dogs to take care of, there's no work. So, because of all of this, I don't know how anybody could measure from my house, put up a windmill. It has to be on my edge of my property. It has to be. And it needs to be more than 1,000, 1,200, 1,500 feet. That isn't going to keep my animals and my employees and me safe. From what I understand, there is, I'm going to call it a danger zone. I don't know all the names for all this stuff. But there is a place to where you're safe. And that much distance from my doghouse and my house is not enough. That's all I got.
Thank you. Carl Schmicker? I don't pronounce
Make sure
your
they
name.
pull the mic over to them. They pull the mic over to them when they're talking.
Oh, okay, I will.
If I don't call your name right, come up anyway. You'll tell us what it is.
This way?
Yeah.
Sure, the one.
You can go something.
Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen of Ground Zero, I'm here to inform you,
Could we get your name and address first, please?
Carl Smicker, 4086 North, 1500 East Road, Cambridge, Illinois. In Fort County, Ground Zero of the Northern Fort County Wind Farm. And I'm going to advise you how your lives are going to change. You like to sleep? These things go in. You'll never get a night's sleep ever again. When the construction happens, they will tear up the roads and put gravel in. Those gravel trucks are constant up and down those roads for several days, several weeks. The gravel is also needed to make the cement to go at the base of these generators. There is a constant plume of gravel dust that will creep across your yard, through your house, everything. And this goes on for days on end. You will not go out to your yard to do anything that you once loved during the construction. But when you call the project manager up, I called up Raymond Fletcher constantly. He told me, Mr. Smicker, there's nothing I can do about it, just live with it. So I was begging and nothing. And then it got to the point where one of his people, Brad Fleetwood, who by chance is now the project manager at Kernan, Illinois, next to Streeter. They're just starting up a wind farm there. And this guy would sit at times at the entrance of my lane, blaring his horn early of a morning. The vehicles going back and forth through in front of your house. You try to wait your turn to get, you're gonna have to do a kamikaze to try to get out. They don't obey the speed limit. And then finally one day I called up a person by the name of Pat Weaver, who was with the company. And Pat informed me, oh yes, Mr. Smicker, I'll take care of that. And he took care of it within a couple hours. There was a water truck that would go back and forth in front of people's houses, spraying water, trying to keep the dust down. But after the water truck employee was gone for the evening, then the dust kept in, it started back in again. And the road was not put in for a couple of years, I guess through some sort of zoning regulations or something. It was not nice. Right before they left, there was one last thing they did. It was done on purpose, I know it was. There was an entrance, without my permission, put into the end of my field. By the way, I did not sign up for no program. But there was an entrance put at the end of my field at a low spot. Water built up right shortly afterwards. You got a copy of this. Still nothing's been done about it. That entrance still there. We haven't had no rain this year. But this was done right after that, Matt. That was sent to Randy Berger, Gregory Perkinson, as well as you, Matt. It's still there. And if we would have gotten a little bit more rain, that entire field would have been flooded. I don't know what to do. And there was no culvert put in to allow the water to go through. You know, they will treat you like a common criminal. I know, I retired at Pontiac Correctional Center with 28 years in as a sergeant. I know about that. But I tell you what, their lives are going to change. They will.
Thank you. You people that are standing in the back, you can move to these chairs here, they're padded. I was thinking about trading mine for one of them. Now just help yourself. You're gonna get tired standing, I'm afraid. Question. Dean Dillon, did you cross your name out?
No.
Oh, there. Okay, Dean Dillon will be the next speaker. Tell the truth, whole truth, nothing but Yes, sir.
My name is Dean Dillon, and my wife Lisa and I own 20 acres east of Gibson City. We have currently our neighbor with quite a bit of acreage that surrounds our 20 that has signed on with the program, and a substantial amount of ownership acreage across the road south of us has also agreed to go with the program. We have some concerns both individually as far as what this will do to our property value. We have residents there and a number of barns. I still have some horses there, and one of the things that concerns me substantially, I've done a fair amount of business with clients in Texas, and quite often the fellows that have had wind farms come into their areas talk about the problems that they have with livestock, the problems that they have, as the lady that spoke earlier, with pets because of the vibrations that are produced by the blades as they turn. The gentleman that just spoke talked about the dust during construction. My wife has a very strong case of asthma and is constantly fighting that, and so we don't know how that is going to affect her life. But over and above our own individual interests, primary of which again is property value and health, the other concerns I have affect Ford County as a whole. I've been doing some research on Google and in some other sources, and my understanding is right now Ford County is talking in terms of requiring a $10,000 fund for decommission of these units. The thing that I have found, while most companies use 20 to 25 years effective use of the wind turbines, what I have found is that in England and in Germany, they find that quite often 12 to 15 years is more appropriate. They find that quite often the 20 to 25 year figure is overly optimistic. And right now, there are some huge questions being raised about what to do, especially with the turbine blades, once a unit is deemed inefficient or once the unit begins to wear out. The blades have many different components that have toxic properties. And so far, most of the wind farms in the United States haven't run into problems with what to do when they replace a unit, because they've been able to send what would be obsolete units in the United States to third world countries and other countries, and have been able to ship them over there and resell them. But sooner or later, there will come a point when that market is not going to be effective, and we're going to have to figure out what to do with the units that become obsolete, that just simply wear out. In addition to some toxic issues with the blades, there also are some issues with the oil and the fluids that are in the turbine unit. And those things have some properties that will create pollution also. Decommission is something, if you haven't already looked it up on Google, I would encourage everybody in here to look up windmill farm decommission on Google. Some figures that I came up with was, first of all, in a Texas Law Review article that was recently published, they made some estimates on what it would cost to decommission a single unit and also to get the concrete base up out of the ground and return the land to what it was before the farm was put on there. They came up with a figure of $25,500 a piece, an average price. There were some wind farms in Texas that have the newer, taller, bigger units, which is what we're talking about in Ford County, and they're considering clear up to $100,000 to $139,000 to get those units, once they become obsolete or out of commission, to get those units replaced and the land returned to normal. It looks to me like there's quite a disparity between the $10,000 figure that I've been told that we're looking at in Ford County and even the $25,500 figure. I can take it a step further. There is a listing on Google from Energy Central, which is located in Harlingen, Texas. And actually, they estimate on the modern units that tear down and refurbish cost on the land will total approximately $200,000 per unit. And they're figuring a 20-year life on those units. The thing that comes back to me is, first of all, we all know that a substantial part of the attraction for businesses to be involved in wind power and in the wind farms is that there are government subsidies. My concern is, what happens if we have an administration come in that terminates those subsidies so the safety net is not there for big business? And let's say the turbines that are put in Ford County, let's be optimistic and say they do make it 20 to 25 years. What's to prevent that company, if the subsidies would be terminated, to file bankruptcy and walk away from it and let Ford County deal with the issue? I think there's a lot more involved here than just individual concerns. I would strongly encourage you folks to get on Google, do some research, look and see what's going on in Germany, see what's going on in England. There are many, many issues in Europe with the wind farms that we haven't seen yet, because those wind farms predated our early ones. And now they're starting to run into the problems of what do we do with these things now that they're no longer useful for us. Thank you. Thank you.
Kevin Morris.
Try to walk around that way. All right, I don't want any trouble. Sheriff's orders.
Can you affirm, tell the truth, whole truth, nothing but the truth?
So help me God.
And in turn, name, address, and connection.
My name is Kevin Martis, Kevon-Martis. I live at 11917 Wagner Road in Oregon, Michigan. I'm here on behalf of interested parties in Ford County. I lecture and educate on equitable wind energy zoning across the Midwest. My lectures have been given on the behalf of citizens groups, and I've also consulted with many townships and county governments all across the region, as far west as North Dakota, Kentucky, Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan,
I'm
Ohio.
sorry, I need to slow down a little bit.
I do listen to court reporters all the time. I
As far
apologize.
west as
North Dakota and down to Kentucky, Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, most of the Midwest. I'm considered an expert by virtue of my training, my education, and my experience in this matter. I spent 6.5 years as a township planning commissioner And we created a zoning ordinance in my township in Michigan that became a state model. And some of the techniques that we use in that zoning ordinance have been found to be of value in communities across the Midwest. I know what it's like to sit on your side of the table. It's not an enviable position. And I hope that a couple of the thoughts that I will share with you this evening might show you a way forward that might take some of the pressure off the county government as far as how to handle these issues as we move into the future. So if I can direct your attention to my slides, I will be brief, but yet I can't hurry because I will outstrip your reporter's abilities. So I apologize in advance for that. I'm a bipartisan group. I'm not paid by any industrial or commercial or energy interest to be here. Some folks sometimes chip me a little money to compensate for my time. I had 6 hours each way to get here tonight, so it's a rather long drive. But I'm not a lobbyist. So you're familiar, as you can see, with the current Ford County regulations. Your noise is governed by the Illinois Pollution Control Board. You currently have, I think, 1,000-foot setbacks to homes, 1.25 times the height of the property lines, and I believe a 500-foot height limit. I apologize if I had any of that wrong. Already talked about this. I'm not offering legal advice. I'll skip over the boilerplate. A couple thoughts. The wind industry and their advocates like to make these zoning deliberations a discussion about how noble, green, and beneficial wind energy development is and how much money will flow into the community. I'm sure you've heard those claims prior to this, particularly since you have some operating wind turbines in your community. But from my perspective, the only issue before us as zoners and planners is how to safely place 50, 60, or now 70-story tall noisy structures into a quiet rural residential environment. Whether these structures produce quote-unquote green electricity, extract oil or coal, or turn sow's ears into silk purses is absolutely irrelevant. This is about separating conflicting uses of land and protecting health, safety, and welfare. Nothing more, nothing less. And as I've already said, I understand what it's like to sit on your side of the table. The good news is, I think that reasonable wind energy zoning regulations driven by two principles, consent and compensation, can shift the burden away from the county government to individual landowners and the wind developer to decide whether a given community hosts utility-scale wind development. This is how it should work in my mind. This is based on free market, private property rights principles. I would like to talk about just a couple of quick arguments that the wind companies often advance to gain preferential treatment in your zoning ordinances. I think it's worth considering them very briefly. First thing you should understand is Illinois ratepayers, and it's harder to see on the screen, but the purple line represents the price of wind energy in really windy states like Iowa or Oklahoma. And it's hard to see, I will try to illustrate, but the trend line through the Midwest is much higher. This line is Michigan's contracts, they're published. But the bottom line is, every turbine that would be built in your county here would simply produce twice as much electricity if it was located in Oklahoma, because the wind resource is that much stronger. So Illinois wind is not a good economic value for Illinois energy users. Another argument is that we have to do something about CO2 emissions because of all the damage CO2 ostensibly does to our environment. Well, we know that the value of the harm from CO2 emissions was valued by the Obama administration at $40 a ton per each ton of CO2 emitted. That's a high number. But yet MISO, who runs our local grids here in the Midwest, a big chunk of them anyways, discovered that reducing CO2 emissions with wind energy actually costs $237 a ton. In other words, there's 6 times the economic harm to ratepayers from reducing CO2 emissions with wind energy rather than simply just eating the cost of those CO2 emissions and dealing with them directly. Wind is a very poor environmental value that's recognized by many sources, including Dr. James Hansen. So now let's talk about one of the strongest arguments wind companies use to advance their agenda in the county. They often speak of promises of great financial benefits to landowners and township or county coffers as an inducement for permissive wind energy zoning. Remember, these promises are all, the money that they promise you is all recovered from Illinois ratepayers and from the U.S. Treasury. There is no free lunch here. There is no free lunch. It's simply a transfer of wealth from communities that don't host wind turbines into the pockets of only a very small percentage of communities and landowners who actually host a wind project. This cartoon, which I wish the rest of the audience could see, sums it up. The developer is throwing $100 bills out of his wallet, and the husband says, look, he's giving us all money just like he promised. The wife observes, he has your wallet. We often see wind companies boast about how wind development supports farms financially. And of course, I come from a farm community. We treasure our farmers. But we know that wind lease payments, of course, benefit the large landowners that host a number of turbines. Nobody disputes that. But assuming that most farmers who host wind turbines host an average of 2 or 3 or 4 turbines in Illinois, some have 1, some have 7. There may be only 800 or 1,000 Illinois farmers receiving the really big wind checks. I'm not counting good neighbor agreements, but the people that actually host a turbine and get the substantial checks of $10,000 or $12,000 or $15,000 per year per turbine. Only 800 to 1,000 Illinois farmers get those big checks, my best estimate. There are 72,000 farms in Illinois. Assuming 1,000 of them get the big checks, that's just over 1% of all Illinois farms. And since wind development raises electricity costs, it also means that the 99% of Illinois farmers not getting wind checks, they're actually taking a loss, especially energy-intensive dairy farmers, which are really struggling right now. I'll go quickly over this, but if you don't like nuclear power and you want to close them down, you can replace this plant in Michigan by building 2 Vestas V100 turbines in every square mile from the city of Toledo to the city of Detroit and nearly to the city of Ann Arbor. But you would still need 1,100 megawatts of gas-fired generation for all those days where we know the wind doesn't blow. From a township perspective, 36 square miles of turbines like this will have an annual potential capacity roughly equal to this single semi-trailer mounted gas turbine that you can fit inside your average dairy barn. Wind development has massive land use implications. It's a very low energy dense source of energy. Now I'm going to get strictly back to the zoning issues. If a developer was here proposing to sell us a car, that would be very simple because unless we're Amish, we all have substantial life experience with cars and all the things that are involved. And we would have brand preferences and so forth. But in my township in 2008, a developer showed up and said they wanted to build some 100-meter class Vestas V100 turbines. We weren't familiar with them in 2008 because there were hardly any there were none in the state of Michigan of that size. So they were 494 feet tall. Well, in Michigan, the comparison we use for height is the Mackinac Bridge, which links our 2 peninsulas. You can see those turbines are nearly as tall as the towers. Now, it's my understanding the turbines proposed in this region, and I know the FAA has approved 660-foot tall turbines in Lincoln County, Illinois, a large number of them. Those would be somewhat taller than the Gateway Arch. Perhaps those are proposed here, I'm not sure. Secondly, looking at setbacks, this is my friend's house. Kerry Schimmeldecker is his name. He lived in that house until he abandoned it due to noise. That's a V100 turbine, a little smaller model, 477 foot. That turbine is 1,139 feet from his home. When the turbine went into operation, he and his wife moved into the basement, and they slept there for a year or 2. Now it's interesting, they sued the developer, and they sued the county before they were built. They lost the suit against the county. They had some kind of settlement, terms of which they cannot disclose with the developer, which was Consumers Energy, and they moved out of the footprint. Now, you may want to conclude this guy was an isolated crank and the community treated him as a pariah. Actually, after all that litigation, he was appointed to the Mason County Planning Commission, and he also sits on their Zoning Board of Appeals. And he's held in high regard, and in fact, Mason County adjusted their zoning, which is very similar then to what you have here, to something much more restrictive, to the point that wind developers no longer see it as a good place to develop wind. 56 turbines were enough for them. So Illinois County, as you may understand, your counties can regulate wind plants. A county may establish standards for wind farms and electric generating devices. The standards may include, without limitation, the height of the devices and the number of devices that may be located within a geographic area. So if my understanding of the Illinois state law is correct, you guys have total liberty to do as required to protect your neighbors. And of course, like all land use regulations, we have to protect health, safety, and welfare. My idea is that if the proposed activity cannot be performed in our communities and at the same time protect health, safety, and welfare, it must not be permitted. Protecting health, safety, and welfare is a sworn duty of elected and appointed officials. Developers of any type are crafty and present many superficially enticing arguments and promises, but protecting health, safety, and welfare comes first. So obvious questions are those developers' profits more important than health, safety, and welfare? Are promised increases in tax revenue more important? Claims of private property rights? Claims of green jobs or emissions reductions more important than health, safety, and welfare? The answer is no. Now I'm just going to quickly go over just 3 things, and we'll stop droning on here. I will mainly focus on height, setbacks, noise, and I'm not going to say anything about decommissioning tonight. But I do want to add one comment to the fellow who spoke just prior to me. We can furnish for you several bids from independent engineers that show that the value of removing a single turbine could be as much as $700,000, and for a whole farm full of turbines could be in the range of $200,000 to $300,000, because it's obviously much more expensive to remove a single turbine than it is to take down 30 or 40, particularly because of the crane costs that can be involved. So you are free to regulate the height of turbines in your community any way you see fit. I'm going to guess your zoning ordinance already regulates the height of homes and so forth to 2 or 3 stories. Now realize that you didn't regulate the height of homes because a 4 or 5 story tall home makes people sick or poses an inordinate health risk. You just didn't want to see homes any taller than that for purely aesthetic reasons. And that's true for wind turbines. You can strictly regulate the size because you didn't want to see them any taller. You don't have to prove that a medical doctor can demonstrate to you that taller turbines make people sick. That's not the standard. You get to regulate on size for just the sake of appearance. We do this with billboards with very little controversy. People generally don't like billboards, so you write a restriction on those. People don't protest. The billboard company might, but they're not that popular group in the first place. Wind turbines have similarly large impacts on the view shed. I'm not going to read all of that slide. But the bottom line is even the wind developers recognize they make a substantial impact on the view shed. So the question I have for you is how tall is too tall for wind turbines in your community? Just like any other land use, and that slide is taken in Illinois, I think those are 390-foot turbines. It's up to you. You just get to pick a number and say we don't want to see them any taller than that. Now setbacks. What's safe and who decides? Well, this chart comes, the wind company will talk to you about industry standards. So I'm sure that when your ordinance was written 10 or 12 years ago, that there was a publication that went around in your community, like it did in mine, that suggested 1,000 foot and maybe 50 or 55 decibels is acceptable. Well, I understand here you've used the Illinois Pollution Control Board. And they will say that's the industry standard. Yet this chart comes from a journal down here called Wind Energy, so a very pro-wind source, published in 2016. And you see there they show setbacks in various nations. France is a mile, Germany is a mile, Manitoba 6,500 feet. Illinois is listed. I don't know where they get this number from since Illinois gets to decide, but somebody must have published a 1,500 foot setback in Illinois. In Michigan, my poor state, was the poster child for irresponsible siting of 1,000 feet. So what about the manufacturers of the turbines? Are they a reliable source? Vestas says if a runaway operation should occur, the plant must be evacuated immediately by running upwind, and access to the surrounding area in a radius of at least 500 meters must be restricted. That's 1,640 feet. Nordex says in case of a fire in the nacelle or on the rotor, parts may fall off the wind turbine. In case of a fire, nobody is permitted within a radius of 1,640 feet. Here's a turbine in Illinois, a 390-footer that had a catastrophic blade failure. You might say it self-decommissioned. The debris field was measured by friends of mine at 1,500 feet, so obviously they had some understanding when they published their safety guidelines of what the real risk radius was. Curiously, I'm quoting 2 safety manuals, but if you were to ask the developers tonight if each of them would bring you safety manuals from the turbines they propose for your area, they are likely to tell you what they're telling us in every other state in the Midwest. It's a proprietary and confidential trade secret, and we won't share that data with you. So my advice is that you add a phrase in your zoning ordinance that requires the developer to submit to your county an unredacted copy of the safety manual for the turbines they intend to build. Ice throw is often poo-pooed by developers as a theoretical risk, yet just this spring, a skylight was damaged when ice flew off a wind turbine at Mount Wachusett Community College. There was also a news report about a semi-trailer on a highway that had a windshield damaged by ice throw from a wind turbine. It's starting to happen. So back to this wind energy paper. Again, this is a peer-reviewed paper studying the journey called wind energy. It's not from Breitbart, it's not from the Koch brothers, it's from an industry source. They said, with respect to ice throw and blade failure events, at normal operating conditions, pieces of blade with weights in the range of approximately 7 to 16 tons, they would be thrown out less than 2,300 feet for the entire range of wind turbines. But in an overspeed event, that blade throw could be up to 1.2 miles from the turbine. For ice throw cases, maximum distances of approximately 328 feet up to 2,000 feet are obtained for similar conditions. And then it says these simulations can be useful for revisions of wind turbine setback standards. So the peer-reviewed paper published in the Wind Industry Journal demonstrates that ice throw and component liberation are real risk inside a range of 328 feet for a standing still turbine, up to 1.2 miles for blade throw during an overspeed event. Nonetheless, wind companies asked for setback ranges between 1,000 to 14 or 1,500 feet from neighboring homes, not your property line, leased or unleased. This is clearly inadequate for today's much taller turbines. Here's the rub. By placing unleased property inside the manufacturer's published evacuation zone, the wind company is given an easement or trespass privileges across unleased private property. I call this trespass zoning. That's a phrase I coined myself. The next era attorneys in Missouri cross-examined me and said, "Isn't that a phrase you just made up?" And I said, "Well, that's true, but the phrase good neighbor agreement was also just made up." And in fact, I can't think of a phrase in the English language that somebody didn't once make up. So this is the phrase I made up, trespass zoning. Wind developers don't like us to refer to the setbacks to homes as being an easement. Yet if you look at their own leases, you'll see that they buy from their lease owners an effects easement, which gives the operator a non-exclusive easement for all kinds of effects like audio, visual, view, light, flicker, noise, shadow, vibration, air turbulence, wake, electromagnetic, electrical, and radio frequency interference. All the things that if your citizens say you're concerned about these things, they try to minimize, yet they nonetheless indemnify themselves from those same risks in their own lease language. Apparently, in the mind of a wind developer, it is only an easement when they purchase the rights to do these things to your home. But when they can talk the zoning board into donating the right to do these things to your home, or the ordinance is silent on it, in some cases, it's not an easement. That defies logic. Here's a quick illustration. I promise you I'm wrapping up. This is what I call trespass zoning. It's not to scale. If you use the developer's recommendations of, say, 1,500 feet to a house, or 1,320, or 1,000, as I just heard in Morgan County last night, you'll see that the evacuation zone is hundreds of feet beyond the unleased home. And I've often wondered that if the turbine caught fire and the developer was running upwind past your house to get to the evacuation radius, are they supposed to knock on the door and at least tell you the turbine's on fire? That's never been clear to me. Now you can move that safety radius back to the home of 1640, but you see this farmer next door has a large evacuation radius still encroaching on his property. That strikes me as unreasonable. It impinges upon his future development rights. And if he didn't have a house on this property, of course, they could be even more permissive. And it could stop you from building a house on your farm for your daughter or son who's going to run your business for you because it's now inside that setback of that easement zone. I think at bare minimum, for 500 class turbines, 500-foot class turbines, you should have a 1,640-foot setback to unleased property lines. And it certainly should be bigger for 660-foot turbines. Here's a wind lease map, and I skipped through several, but the green parcels here, this is from an Exelon project. And the gray parcel in the middle is a farm that's not leased, and these circles are the 1,320-foot radius setback. And you can see the radius comes right up to this unleased home. And here on this parcel, fully 50% of their property is now inside the evacuation zone. And yet this guy didn't sign a lease, even though he's a farmer. The right to swing my fist ends where the other man's nose begins. Chief Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes. My corollary says, if my development project requires me to repeatedly punch you in the nose, I should first get your consent and then compensate you for your broken nose. That only seems neighborly. Remember, the express goal of zoning regulations is to separate conflicting land uses from each other. That's the whole purpose that we zone in the first place. By establishing setbacks from neighboring homes rather than property lines, the conflicting uses actually granted legal access to the neighboring property without consent or compensation. This is fundamentally unjust. We don't do this for any other industry. So what is the right setback? As I said, for a 500-foot class, at least 1640 to a property line. But in view of the recent peer-reviewed research on blade and ice throw and other documents, which we just don't have time to look at tonight, far bigger property line setbacks are now reasonable as well. And finally, noise. How loud is too loud, and who do you believe? Well, here's 73 people who signed a petition in the Garden Peninsula of northern Michigan. They only have 14 turbines in their community, but these 73 people all signed a petition asking for the noise to stop. I think the setback distances in average are about 1,320 feet. Curiously, this project's owned by Marty Legina, who's the star of the Curse of Oak Island reality TV show. They will tell you that 40 to 50 decibels, which is something that is currently in the law in the Illinois Pollution Control Board regulations, is like normal conversational speech. But what they don't tell you is that in your quiet rural community at night, you're going to hear 20 to 25 or 30 decibels. So by giving them the right to go to 40 or 50, they're giving themselves the ability to double or quadruple the amount of noise you hear at night in your community without any financial impact upon them. So there's a problem with the Pollution Control Board standards, and I'm sure this man's name has come up before. Dr. Schomer is a very respected acoustician, and he helped write those standards. And this news article says that he's spent over 50 years working as an acoustician, dedicating the last decade to researching wind turbine noise. He serves as the Emeritus Chairman of the Acoustical Society of America. Schomer said when he helped write the Illinois Pollution Control Board's noise standards over 60 years ago, wind farms were never contemplated. Ted Harkey, who I know you've had some interaction with, cross-examined Dr. Schomer and asked whether the current noise standards would fully protect residents near the proposed wind farm. Schomer says, I don't feel the standards are adequate for that purpose. Schomer said the general consensus among his colleagues is the limit should be set around 40 decibels. The ordinance in this community also required wind turbines to be set back 1,500 feet or 3 times the tower's height from an occupied residence. Schomer said he recommended increasing that setback to 3,300 feet. By the way, Dr. Schomer has actually worked for wind companies, including Invenergy. This is consistent with guidance we see from the World Health Organization. It shows us that from 40 decibels and up, we start to see impacts on human health. A recent paper, 2018, on wind turbine impacts on neighbors, says through using an alternative wind turbine exposure measurement, this analysis demonstrated that living in close proximity to wind turbines is associated with lower environmental and physical quality of life measures. It also strengthened the notion that wind turbines are associated with annoyance by finding a significant association between closer residential proximity to wind turbines and increased annoyance. Dave Hessler, who works for many wind companies, again concurs, 40 decibels or less. NextEra, interestingly, in their website for their Ontario wind projects, and the gentleman mentioned the fact that when the subsidies run out, they sometimes may disappear. In Ontario, they just canceled all the renewable energy incentives. The Green Energy Act was canceled. NextEra sold off all their Ontario projects at one whack to a pension fund there. But when they were actively building in Ontario, they were proud of this fact when they said the Ontario Ministry of Environment's sound guidelines for rural areas established maximum permissible sound levels at residences of 40 decibels. And then they added this very important statement. They said, which is consistent with the standards set by the United States Environmental Protection Agency. Here's what's perverse about that. In Canada, they say that 40 decibels is the right number based upon science from the US EPA. But when NextEra shows up in Michigan communities, they ask for a 55 decibel noise limit. It is clear the IPCB standard is outdated. I recommend a 40 decibel nighttime noise limit at non-participating property lines. And for a solution to this whole question of how are we going to handle future wind development here, I would suggest a two-part noise limit. Do a very low nighttime noise limit on these property lines, and a very high noise limit at lease owners' homes. That's what we do in my Riga Township ordinance, which you can find at rigatownship.com. But then permit those very low noise limits to be waived so that the wind company, if they want to build, can simply go out and collect waivers from the neighboring landowners who are actually going to have to deal with this. And with those waivers, they can get very small setbacks and very low or very high noise limits. But at least that way, each person will have the right individually to negotiate the value of their loss of amenity associated with wind development. It places that decision of whether this project goes forward into the hands and pocketbooks of the developer and all the landowners living in your community. That's very reasonable. Property values, I don't think I need to belabor it, but of course they will bring this paper to you from the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. It's called the Home Study. They bring it since 2008, claim no harm to property values. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip it, but the bottom line is there's at least 11 independent studies with no ties to the wind industry that show substantial losses of property values in close proximity with wind turbines. I think that since wind companies are insistent that wind turbines don't harm neighboring property values, it would not cost them anything then to offer a property value guarantee. Now finally, my very last section, and I will go away into the night. This same lab that the wind developers claim as the gold standard on property values released another study in January of this year. And this is a very important study now. So again, the Berkeley Lab has completed this study. And it's called the National Survey of Attitudes of Wind Power Project Neighbors, Summary of Results. Because one of the things we wonder as the zoning board is, isn't it just a small minority of cranks that don't like living next to wind turbines? Well, the Berkeley National Lab has done a very large comprehensive study to answer that very question. One of the problems with the study is that they measure people up to 5 miles away from wind turbines. And I'm going to tell you, I've never claimed that anybody has a serious impact from a wind turbine 5 miles away. So they've obviously diluted the data pool a whole bunch. But they also broke it down into subgroups based on proximity to the turbines. So the wind companies will run an ad in your paper that will show this, that says, look, only 8% of the people that live near wind projects have any opposition to the project. But that includes people up to 5 miles away. So it's a highly dilute data pool. But when they break it down into various setback distances, you see the folks at a half mile. You now have 25% of the people within a half mile have a very negative attitude. Well, guess what? Most of the people in the project footprint are going to live within a half mile. And so if you're going to put 300 turbines here, you may have 1,000 or 1,500 people in your community with a strongly negative reaction. That doesn't strike me as a win for good land use policy. Now, people will often tell you, you have turbines here, so you may know different, but you often hear promoters of wind say, I stood right under them and they don't make any noise whatsoever. Well, LBL reports that within a half mile, 81% of the people can hear wind turbine noise. 81%. Not only that, it says nearby wind turbine neighbors can hear turbines inside their homes with windows open and closed. So if you stood under a turbine and didn't hear anything, it was not at full power. There was not wind shear. Now this statistic gets a little distorted because of how they measured it, but the bottom line is they said of the 81% of people living within a half mile who report being able to hear wind turbine sounds, 57% report annoyance, and 31% are moderately to very annoyed. 57% of those who can hear a turbine within a half mile are annoyed, and 31% are moderately to very annoyed. That is not an endorsement of a winning land use policy. That could be thousands of people in any given county. I don't think that's an acceptable loss rate. And large people do not like the visual impacts of wind turbines. 42% of the people with 1.5 mile don't like them. But even at 3 to 5 miles, you see, 17, 18, 25% or so have a negative response. Yeah, 3 to 5 miles away, 30% of the people are annoyed by the sight of wind turbines. This is the Lawrence Berkeley lab. This isn't some anti-wind extremist. Remember, currently nobody in your county, except the few living very near the turbines you have right now, are being annoyed by these things at all. My point, as I wrap up, is Lawrence Berkeley lab has validated everything I've been teaching people about for years. Wind turbine noise is loud enough to be heard inside homes. A large percentage of people living within a mile of wind turbines are annoyed by both the sight and sound. Even at a great distance, wind turbines are a visual stigma to many turbine neighbors. By coupling the ice and blade throw data from the Wind Industry Journal with the LBL report, we see that the industry is finally having to face the simple fact that we have been maintaining for years. Utility-scale wind development adversely affects a large number of people when placed too closely to homes. The question for setbacks is no longer 1,000 feet or 1,320. It is clearly a question of a half mile or 1.25 miles. That's the proper range. Remember, nobody's ever come before this body and said, the light coming through my windows is too steady, could you make it flicker? Nobody's ever come in and said the nighttime noise level is too quiet, could you raise it to 55 decibels from 25? Nobody's ever said my property values are too stable, could you build some 50-story industrial machines next door to put that value at risk? The bottom line of zoning is quite simple. We were here first. We get to decide. Many Illinois counties have been strengthening their outdated wind ordinances. The Ford County wind zoning ordinance is now 12 years old and sharply out of step with the latest science. On behalf of interested parties in Ford County, I urge you to consider the data I presented as you update your regulations. Thank you.
If we could cease that, would help us get along a little faster. Next spokesman would be David Loomis.
What was the last name?
Loomis. Solemnly swear to approve and tell the truth and so help you God. I do. Name, address.
Yeah, my name is David Loomis, and I'm at 2705 Colby Court, Bloomington, Illinois. And I'm here on behalf of Pattern Energy and Apex to discuss two independent studies that I did for them. For the sake of time, I'm going to combine the results there in terms of the economic impact of the Heritage Prairie and the Ford Ridge wind projects that are proposed. As you can see, I'm president of Strategic Economic Research, a consulting firm that specializes in looking at tax and economic impacts of renewable energy projects and actually other energy projects as well. I'm a professor of economics at Illinois State University and was one of the co-founders of the Center for Renewable Energy there at Illinois State. Given expert testimony before county boards, Senate committees, and regulatory bodies. And so I just wanted to outline the tax benefits that would accrue from these projects and look at the economic impacts. So I'll skip the methodology for the sake of time. But if you go to slide number 5, it will look at the county impacts and actually also the combined township impacts of county and township taxes would have for the combined both projects. You can see in the first year, it's assuming that the Apex project gets built in 2020 and then it's joined by 2021.
Allow me to interrupt the process. Phil Witkehans on behalf of certain citizens.
I'm sorry, what was your
Phil
name?
Witkehans, L-U-D-T-K-E-H-A-N-S, on behalf of concerned citizens of Ford County for their property rights, or Ford County. This is a zoning hearing. The issues before you are the LaSalle factors. The LaSalle factors deal with zoning issues. And I will just make this, economic issues are not part of your zoning ordinance. They're not part of the standards for a text amendment. They're completely irrelevant. Now you can spend the next 45 minutes listening to Dr. Williams, we've all heard him. But at the end of the day, it's completely irrelevant and not part of your actual standards or what you need to watch.
I'm sorry, sir, but we're going to go with the list as we have.
That's
Thank
fine. I just want to create the record. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And I will be brief. You have the numbers before you, but I just wanted to explain the reason that the numbers are different from 2020 to 2021. 2021 is when we assume both projects, and those are tax years, are fully under development. If you look at the Ford County number, you're looking at the county total tax there over the projected 30-year life of the wind farm of slightly over $17 million. You look at the townships, you combine all the townships that will be affected, it's $16.3 million. On the next two slides, I don't want to run through all those, but it's just to show you the number of different townships that would be affected. From Ford Ridge, you see the 4 different townships that would be collecting tax revenue from the project. And on the next slide, slide 7, labeled Table 7, the Heritage Prairie project would see an additional 4 townships that would be affected. Turning now to slide 8, it says Table 8, School District Tax Implications. You'll see 4 different school districts that would be affected by the 2 different wind farms. The first being the Gibson City one, and then Tri-Point, Paxton, Buckley, Loda Community School District, and Iroquois West would be there. And if you look at the total there, if we look at the total combined for all the different school districts over the projected life of the projects, you're looking at $67.6 million in total school district revenue that would come over the life of the project. Finally, if you look at Table 3 that's labeled Total Employment Impacts from the combined wind projects, this is looking at those economic impact factors that would say if we look at the direct impacts, those would be direct employment during construction, and then the direct impacts from workers employed at the wind farm, mainly wind turbine technicians, but there'd also be site supervisors and so forth. So I separated out the construction impacts, which are going to be one time, only during construction, and then the long-term impacts, the ongoing operations and maintenance impacts. And just focusing there on those impacts for Ford County, you see 892 jobs being supported during construction, and during operations you see 73 jobs being supported over the long term, so that it would be expected to last the 30 years for the wind farm. And I will add that those jobs, especially those jobs that are the direct impacts, are good paying jobs. Wind turbine technician jobs are very good paying jobs. Those construction jobs that would be there on site are very good paying jobs. So in conclusion, I already said that there's $67.6 million in total school district revenue here. If you combine that with all the other taxing entities, county, township, fire district, and libraries, etc., you're going to see at least $105.4 million in property taxes for all those taxing entities. And as I said, you're going to see good paying jobs both on the construction one-time part and long-term jobs being created in Ford County. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Joanne Fetzner. Is it Joanne? Solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Thank you, ma'am.
Good evening, gentlemen. Oh, Joanne Fetzner, 962 North 700 East Road, Sibley, Illinois.
Did you people hear that? No. Speak up if you would, please.
Okay, Joanne Fetzner, 962 North 700 East Road, Sibley, Illinois. We live on 20 acres and we have all the land around us that's being signed for wind turbines. We moved into this area from Will County in 1998. We bought a business in Gibson City, but due to some health issues my husband had, we sold the business a few years later. We fell in love with this community, bought 20 acres, and built our dream home. Through the years, we have been very content until all this talk about the wind farm invasion started in Ford County. A lot of reading and research has consumed my days for some time now. Health and safety is a key factor to our continued living in our home. I have an issue with vertigo, which I experience more often than I care to think. I have been unfortunate enough, it only lasts a few days, but this is a few days too many. While I have it, the dizziness and nausea feeling is terrible. My husband suffers from constant ringing in the ears, tinnitus, and severe motion sickness. Believe me, he is quite a treat to travel with. He wears patches, takes pills, and wears wristbands. With these turbines being proposed at 1,500 feet from our structure, not our property line, I am very concerned that these turbines are going to activate the frequency of these health issues, which will affect our living, drastically. A recently published peer-reviewed comprehensive information prepared by medical doctors, pathologists, and engineers strongly warn of major psychological consequences of living too close to wind turbines. There are two categories. Number one is wind turbine syndrome, which produces symptoms related to the balanced organs. This causes disturbed sleep, headaches, tinnitus, and a sense of quivering or vibration, nervousness, rapid heartbeat, nausea, difficulty with concentration, memory loss, irritability, and anger. The other, which is number two, is a vibroacoustic disease, which causes direct tissue and organ damage. The first one discontinues when a person moves away from the source. The second one, the symptoms continue long after the source is turned off. Both can be very harmful and debilitating and possibly deadly. This is published by Thomas Jones. He has a BSME and an MSME. This was really some disturbing information, and I'm going to submit this information to you gentlemen for your review. Okay. I'm also submitting an article from the Huron Daily Tribune regarding a Michigan woman, Deb Ruth, her battle with Meniere's disease, and how the wind company, who is DTE Energy, responded and how their township board handled the situation. I'm also submitting my doctor's note with regards to my issues with vertigo. Meniere's and tinnitus and vertigo are all related. I feel I'm fighting for my life, gentlemen, and for the right to live in my home. I'm asking you to protect my husband and my health and the health of your country residents. Safe and proven setbacks of 3,250 feet, as stated by Dr. Paul Schomer, an acoustics expert from Champaign, said that this distance would protect the majority of homes from low-frequency noise. And Mr. Macy, a lawyer who represented Vanguard, formerly Iberola, stated under oath that the Cayuga Ridge project in northern Livingston County could have been built with 3,250-foot setbacks. Safe setbacks of 3,250 feet from property lines are the only way our good health can be ensured. I am hopeful you will educate yourselves, and with that education, I am confident you will have your eyes open to the wind turbine hazards. We are counting on you, gentlemen. Do what is right. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to give this to you because there is this information here for you to go through and read. It's very interesting.
Thank you. Patty Feldman, is that pronounced proper?
Patty Mier, I think that's her.
Patty Mier.
You firm to tell the truth, whole truth, nothing but the truth? Amen. Yes. I'm sorry. Okay.
My name is Patty Mier, and my address is 887 North, 1100 East Road, Melbourne. M as in Michael, EU, N as in Nancy, IE. We have 10 acres, obviously out in the country, and I also have farmers that have signed up for the program right around me. For my first recollection, I've always wanted a big old farmhouse out in the country, just like the one my grandparents had. When the opportunity presented itself almost 22 years ago, I was ecstatic. Much to my husband's horror, as we pulled into the driveway of our now home, I said, "This is it. I don't need to see anything else." I had a vision, but all he could see was the hay bales around the foundation, a structure in much need of paint, roofing and new windows, and the barns needing overdue maintenance. And that was just the outside. Our home has come a long way since February of 1996, and it's been almost 22 years in the making. But I am grateful that you trusted my vision, and my love affair with my country home continues to this day. I have no intention of going anywhere, and have been proud to be a tax-paying resident of Ford County. I hope that my loyalty is repaid with careful and unbiased consideration of all the facets regarding the current wind farm ordinance to ensure that our property rights are held intact. Your decisions will have a serious effect on the use and value of our land. In one of the many zoning board appeal manuals I referenced, it was stated, the ZBA is ultimately intended to serve as a safety valve for the community. And I believe this is true. You are our safety valve, gentlemen. Following are some facts about the increasing use of property lines in wind farm ordinances. The most recent, in Livingston County, Illinois, earlier this year, cited wind turbines at 3,250 feet from property lines of non-participating residents. Also, in our neighboring state of Indiana, the setbacks listed as of August 7, 2018 by county are as follows. Allen, Boone, Fulton, Marshall, Pulaski, Jasper, and Wells counties banned or recommended ban. Wayne County, banned at present with 100-foot height restrictions. Clinton County, moratorium at present. Delaware County, 150-foot high restrictions. Miami County, 2,000-foot setbacks to property lines and roads. Noble County, 3,960-foot setbacks. Rush County, 2,300-foot setbacks to property lines. Tipton County, 2,640 setbacks, which was increased after Phase 1 was completed. Wabash County, 3,920-foot setbacks, 0 shadow flicker, and 32 decibel noise limits. Whitley County, 2,640-foot setbacks, or 6.5 times the tower height, whichever is greater, and decommissioning money up front. No bonds allowed. These counties are serious about protecting property rights. I'm not asking for a ban, simply rights to all of my property. Circling back a minute to the Livingston County hearing, and this was mentioned earlier, the attorney for the wind farm company, Mr. Massey, stated under oath that the project could have been built with 3,250-foot setbacks. It would require more work for the wind farm company, but it could have been done. The wind company chose not to do the work. The fact is that this is not the problem with the ZBA. Your job is to make safe zoning for all Ford County residents, period. As more wind farms are built, more studies by independent parties are being done regarding property rights and the health and safety issues that go with them. We pay property taxes, which gives us the right to enjoy all of our property. The only way to ensure safe, total use of our property is to use setbacks from our property lines. You may reference the several studies that I've attached, one by Nina Pierpont on the wind turbine syndrome, Dr. Paul Schulmer's paper on acoustics, a paper on documentation of damaging health effects of wind turbines, which dates back as far as 1981, with research from NASA, Cornell University, and MIT. I've attached several others for reference, as well as a listing of additional studies and sources from Environmental Health Journals and the Environmental Health Journal and the Bulletin of Science, just to name a few. I have those documents and I will be leaving those with you, so I ask you to please read them. It's a fact that 650-foot offshore-sized turbines are being proposed for Ford County, the first of its size in the U.S. according to the wind farm representatives themselves. Currently, the only 650-foot turbine is a prototype at Texas A&M. These turbines are taller than the St. Louis Arch and almost double what is currently in the area, as we were shown earlier. I've seen no information or discussion presented, nor have there been any changes to the ordinance to accommodate setbacks from these huge turbines, which will have larger evacuation zones, flicker, noise, etc. Please note that the earlier studies that I just discussed, and I'm leaving with you, that these are based on the smaller turbines, not the monsters. They're data. I, as a Ford County resident, did not agree to my property or my family being an experiment. The only acceptable setbacks are from property lines, and if you don't have real calculations, then we don't want the turbines. A current board member was quoted in the Paxton Record in April as saying he no longer wished to assign decibel limits. He further stated, as I thought about it, I'm not sure I know what a 35 and 42 are, let alone how to measure them properly. If somebody has a problem with the noise level, then let them work that out with the wind farm company. This is absolutely unacceptable. If you do not know or understand the calculations for safety evacuation zone setbacks and their importance from property lines, shadow flicker, infrastructure, decibel levels, or noise from any size turbine onto a neighboring property, you are not ready to pass an ordinance. Do the work you have been elected or appointed to do, or take yourself out of the decision-making process. The residents of Ford County deserve better than this. Property rights are at stake, and with that comes many issues. The fact is that this decision will impact lives for years to come, with no option of a do-over post-construction. Fact, these turbines cannot be moved. Fact, these turbines cannot be repositioned. Fact, if setbacks are inappropriate, it is irreversible once these turbines are constructed and could cost us our health and our homes. We should not be subjected to living on property in safety evacuation zones in any capacity and our health and safety should never be compromised by the very people we entrust with the power to protect us. You are obligated to take the side of caution when it comes to zoning for your Ford County residents. Remember, you, the ZBA, are our safety valve to property rights. Frankly, property line setbacks of 3,250 feet with an open door for the wind farm company to negotiate with good neighbor agreements privately is a fair compromise. The fact is, the ZBA will have done its job of protecting property rights of residents, as well as bringing the property right decision back to the property owner if they want to accept a distance from a structure, as it should be. Let the wind company do their own work. In closing, I leave you with this. Taking away the rights of private citizens to benefit what the government determines needs it is a definition of socialism. If a decision is made that does not include setbacks from our property lines, what does that say about our Ford County government? I'm also going to leave you with just some diagrams of, just to show you a visual of what these big turbines, based against what we already currently have. And then I also have the diagram similar to what Mr. Martish had, showing how we are in the evacuation zones if you don't use our property lines. So I ask you to please look at these.
Yes.
Thank you.
You've had a request, are you completely on time?
Yes, I am. Yes, thank you.
Yes, I'm.
No, you're fine. Thank you.
We've had a request to take a break.
Yes.
If we could take a break, can we do it in 5 minutes?